All right, so now we'll get to filling in our colors. Again, our goal is to recreate the 12 color wheel using only primary colors, no cheating. I can tell if you're cheating and you're using a tubed green because it looks different than one that you would create using these. So please make sure that, again, you're only using the primary colors. It's kind of like a lab experiment. We're trying to see if color theory in fact works. So we're creating new hues using these 3 elemental ones. With watercolor, you don't need a lot. You need about, I always say, about the size of your pinky nail. You can always squeeze out more, but you can't squeeze it back into the tube. And they're not crazy expensive, but they're expensive enough to replace. So you want to use them sparingly. And watercolor is meant to dilute with some water. I wouldn't pour the water in. That's going to create a very, very translucent wash. We just want to make it a little bit runnier. So what I do is I just dunk my brush in, just kind of moisten my brush, and then I bring it into the color. Sometimes you want it to be really, really runny. It gives you more, again, of a translucent look. Here we wanted the color to be pretty intense. But again, we still want to add water because that's how you use watercolors. You should never just be using watercolor straight out of the tube. Always add some water to it, okay? And I'm going to quickly fill in my red section. So while you're filling in the color wheel, okay, you're doing 2 things. You're seeing how colors mix to create new colors. And you're also practicing just using your brush and moving your hand and moving your wrist and like actually moving the brush in different directions to neatly cover this area. As an adult artist, I find that I have a pretty unstable hand. So I always, my little trick is to stick out my finger just for a little bit of extra stability. So you'll find that as you're completing this, you'll find things that work for you. Okay, and you don't want to glob it on. It shouldn't be soggy and wet. It should kind of be absorbing into the paper as you stretch it across. And just be a nice even coat. Okay, I'm going to rinse my brush. And while you're switching from color to color, you might find that it actually tints your brush, especially if you have a white Taklon brush, you'll find that it's tinted into a new color. So always just test out that you've cleaned it off and that there's no color coming out of it between switching. Okay, my next primary color is yellow. This one's not open yet. If you have a brand new set, I would recommend even just massaging the tube a little bit. You don't know how long they've been in the factory warehouse or in the store. And sometimes I find with watercolors in particular, the pigment and the water in the tube separate. So if it's been sitting in the store for a few months, even up to a year, if the water separates out of it and you don't give it a massage, when you go and squeeze it out onto your palette, you might find a lot of water runs out of the tube, and that's not good because then you'll end up with dry pigment in here. So just a quick massage as you avoid doing that. And to puncture a hole in it, you either need something very thin like a toothpick to puncture it, or sometimes your lid, these lids have one, it's got kind of like a little sharp tool at the end of it, almost like when you buy tubes of crazy glue. There you go. You could just pierce a hole in the aluminum lid. And again, they're not meant to be used straight out of the tube. Watercolor needs a little bit of water. And now I'm going to fill in my yellow section. And when I'm working on a color wheel, I like to focus on 2 primaries at a time and the colors that exist between those 2. So for now, let's focus on the area between red and yellow and ignore what's happening here with the blue, okay? So we have the red and the yellow. The secondary color that's created by mixing these two primaries is orange. So let's try that out. Always introduce the darker primary into the lighter one. Sorry about that. I had a roll of tape stuck to the wall that just fell. Okay, so you want to mix it until you get kind of like a medium pumpkin orange. I feel like I need to add a little bit of yellow back into this. It looks a bit too red. Ideally, you want it to be kind of half and half. And I'm going to add a little bit more water to it. So again, I'm just adding water by dunking my brush into the water and bringing it back in. I'm not pouring the water into it. Okay, and test it out. If when you're testing it out, it's too light, if it's too yellow or too red for you, you can go back and mix it some more. I feel like this works as a nice medium orange. And again, you'll see if you're using watercolor paper, it absorbs really nice. If you're not using mixed media or watercolor paper, you might find that it gets very runny. In which case, if you've got too much liquid on here, you might even want to just dab your brush off on a Kleenex or paper towel and then just bring your brush back and stretch out the remainder of the paint. Okay, so on this side here, we're going to get a tertiary color. We're mixing a primary and a secondary together. So we're going to get a yellow orange. And you always label a tertiary color with the primary parent first, dash secondary color involved. And on the upper end here, we have another tertiary color created by a primary red and a secondary orange. We call this a red orange. So if you were walking into a nail salon and you were looking at different colors of nail polish, or even if you went to Benjamin Moore and you were looking at various colors to paint your home, you might find really interesting names for colors. This one might be called gold, it might be called mango, tropical yellow, yellow ochre. This one might be called tomato red, cherry red, right? Brilliant red. In this case, again, we're just very scientific and factual about it. As artists, we just label colors based on what they're made out of. It just makes life easier. If you need to go back and recreate that color, you know the formula for it. Okay, so here we're mixing primary yellow with orange. So I'm going to take some of the orange that I made and I'm going to bring it back into some more yellow. Okay, and again, I'm going to dilute that with a little bit of water. So here our goal is to get something that doesn't look like this or like this. You want something in the middle, something distinctly different. And I'm happy with what we're getting here. Actually, in this lighting right now on the camera, it's looking a lot like the yellow. But in fact, it's a lot more orange. Maybe if I turn this on, you guys can see the difference. With watercolor too, you'll see while you're using them, the color is nice and saturated, but it comes out like almost like a clear translucent layer. So if you want to do a second layer on your watercolor, you have to wait for your first layer to dry. That's the trick with watercolor paint. The bottom layer has to be dry for you to layer more paint on top. Okay, so if you want to do another layer of this golden color there, we need to wait for this to get dry to the touch first. I'm going to go over it a second time. The color comes out a bit nicer. Okay, again, so you want it to be a distinctly new color. And at this point, we're going to mix that original orange with some red. So I'm going to bring some of that orange back into my red. And it's going to turn the red into a red-orange. Again, a little bit more ketchup-y as opposed to rosy red. And again, we want something that's different from this and different from this. Kind of a middle color. All right. So we'll let that dry. And again, I'm going to rinse my brush off really good. Dry it off. And now we're going to focus on the next section of our wheel. So let's go down here. We're working between this primary color and our next primary color, blue, between yellow and blue. So I'm going to need to go back to my palette, and because these are all mixed, I can't use these anymore. I want to get some fresh blue. And some clean yellow. Okay, so I think I'm going to end this video clip here, and then we'll do the next section in the next video.